Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions regarding this watch. Today we are discussing an all-time great, the first Omega Seamaster that truly gave the Rolex Submariner a scare in the marketplace. The first Omega worn on a regular basis by James Bond, and let's be perfectly honest, one of the few Omega watches for which we have memorized the modern reference number. It's the legendary Seamaster Diver 300-meter 2531.80.00. Part of a model line launched in 1993, it represented a, pun intended, sea change for the Seamaster. In its prior lives, and there were many of them, Seamasters tended to be redesigned on a regular basis, with the new collections often bearing no resemblance to the old ones. The continuous churn made it difficult for Omega to really position the watch as a rival to the evergreen and slow-evolving iconic Rolex Submariner. But this design, launched in 1993, struck a chord, and not just because they paid to put it on screen in a movie, but because people genuinely realized the quality inherent. You were getting something for your money that was at least the equal of the Rolex, and in some regards quite a bit better. A classical size, design, beautiful proportions and details. This is a design that has gone the distance where no previous Seamasters ever had. Now more than a quarter century old, really more than 30 years and counting. This is a watch that is likely to always be in the Omega catalog, but first is a flag that flies forever, and this first generation is the most endearing and the most collectible. So 41.5 millimeters in diameter in stainless steel. It's amazing to think about how thin these were before the coaxials. It's 11.9 millimeters thick, 48 millimeters from lug to lug if we just count the case. If we count the end links of the bracelet, 53.3 millimeters across the wrist with a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. I own this watch, not the exact example on the camera. Mine isn't a Tritium dial, but I do have this generation of watch, and it wears beautifully on my wrist, and it has for years. I went through boot camp with this watch. I did my 3rd class and 2nd class Navy swim test. I guess you could call my watch a military-worn Seamaster. But mine isn't this good looking, frankly. It's that combination of the Omega Wave matte blue dial with the Tritium that really makes this pop. And because my wrist is not large at 16 centimeters, you can easily envision this fitting on a wrist as small as 14, maybe 15. 15 if your wrist is round, 14 if your wrist is flat across the top and oval. And yes, it will easily slide under a cuff. The bracelet was probably the part of this watch that was most threatening to the dominance of the Submariner, at least in terms of actual substance in the hand. Rolex image can never be attacked. Rolex is unassailable from a marketing and brand equity standpoint, but in the hand, you could tell that compared to the hollow center link, hollow end link Rolex bracelets of the 90s, this was a step up. All solid links. You could see it's got a little bit of a sort of hybrid of a dress and sports bracelet aesthetic, and that was down to Omega not really knowing how people would wear these at the time. This being a little bit more of an upscale Seamaster than offered in the past. It was also built with a bracelet that was maybe a little bit more formal. So you have these sort of rolled edges to the links and the polished intermediates and this 5 primary link design. But once you get to the dive clasp, it's all business. Thick gauge steel. Remember the oyster clasps, the 90s, stamped thin, a little bit tinsel-like? Not here. Really robust, and twin trigger release, no clamshell. You've got a fold-out dive extension. It too is thick gauge and robust, still closing with a snick and a snap to this day. You can see this watch, which just came back from a factory service, has everything going for it, including engravings and character lines that remain super deep and sharp. So the refinishing has been professional and infrequent. You could see the same is true regarding the bevels on the case and the facets of the bezel. Screw-down crown, 300-meter water resistance. This was beginning of Omega's helium escape valve for saturation divers. So if you are that guy, a saturation diver, and you are going to be on a exotic gas dive lasting hours, days, or sometimes even weeks, that one big decompression gets the helium out of your bloodstream and the inert gas out of your bloodstream, but also you need to get it out of your watch, and it sometimes can't get out fast enough if you don't have one of these relief valves. So you open the valve before you ascend, and as you decompress, the helium will be able to exit the watch, so there's no danger of it blowing out the seals or the crystal. Not necessary for most diving, but a fun conversation piece. And of course, a functional part of James Bond's kit. I think that was the detonator component of his initial GoldenEye Seamaster. Screw down crown here with crown guard profiles. We have a quick set and hacking seconds function when you screw the crown out. The bezel still has a super sharp click to it, 120 click action. The one idiosyncrasy of this bezel has always been the very shallow knurling. So before your hands get wet in your dive, you really want to make sure you set this. Anodized aluminum insert, I don't care how durable ceramic is, there's nothing as evocative as an anodized metal diving insert. It looks the business and it reflects light in a way glossy ceramic never can. Of course, this watch, having come back from service recently, the bezel and the original hands were beyond redemption, so they were replaced with modern superluminova. So you can see the tritium fade on the dial is absolutely the real deal. The hands had been marked and the bezel pearl was missing, so they were replaced with superluminova. The dial will fade very quickly, but the hands and the bezel pearl will remain luminescent. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get brand new factory hands and bezel insert, the ability to see your watch in the dark, but also a genuine and incredibly warm and endearing tritium dial. And you can see that is, in fact, a tritium dial. You can also see the skeletal outlines of the hour and minute hands, which would become hereafter known as the James Bond style hands, contrasting with the broadswords that came out on the GMT version in 1998. Most purists prefer these. The Omega Wave dial, especially on a matte dial base, is also something that's considered GoldenEye iconic. Now, it's true, in GoldenEye, the watch was quartz. There were quartz, mechanical chronometer, and initially mechanical non-chronometer versions of the watch, but for his last 3 turns as Bond, Pierce Brosnan wore the mechanical chronometer. Not much to see on the back, but inside, I believe this one has the Omega 1120 because of the era, because it is a 60 million range serial number, and because it probably on that basis has caliber 1120. I'm going to advise you that this is caliber 1120. There were 2 different movements. Very early on, caliber 1109, some changes were made to the winding system. It became the 1120. Both of them are elaborations of the ETA 2892A2, so there are not a lot of differences between them, but the winding system was revived and revised in about the mid-1990s. Now, around 97 to 98, Omega went away from tritium on these watches, so this watch is likely to be an overlap between the tritium dial era and the 1120 caliber era. So tritium came before, 1120 came after, but I believe this watch straddles both eras. So being a 2892A2, it allows this watch to be very thin, pre-coaxial, so it's nice and tough. Automatic winding with bidirectional action, 44-hour power reserve, 4 Hz beat rate, 23 joules, which is 2 more than a standard 2892. Omega did make some changes. It also features Omega-specific finishing. And the Omega version, the 1120, has 2 more hours of power reserve at 44 than you get with the standard 2892A2. And of course, then 5 position adjusted and a chronometer. It is an excellent movement. I once wiped out on my road bike, crashed, and had bone showing through my wrist, and the watch on the wrist was still ticking. And again, like I said, I own this model. I still have all the scars on the crystal and the bezel insert just to remind me of that day. But the fact is, EMTs had to scrape me up off the pavement. My watch was just fine. Dented and dinged, yes, but running just fine. That's how tough these watches are. In fact, this is probably real-world tougher than any of the actors who play James Bond. So if you love this watch just for what it is and you couldn't care less about the movies, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.